This week, Parashat Emor, we talked about the more famous part of the Parashat, the Moadim. What are they doing here? Why are we suddenly talking about the Chagim? Last week, we talked about Yom Kippur. What is Yom Kippur doing last week? But really, we have to try to understand what are the Chagim doing over here. And more than that, what are the Psukim right after the Chagim, which talk about the oil and the bread that was brought in the Mikdash to the Menorah and the Shulchan. What are they also doing there? And what's the connection between the two things?
Yeah, we saw how not only are the Chagim here, they're here without the Korbanot, which we would expect would be here. And we saw that what connects the Chagim to the rest of the Sefer is not the Korbanot. It's something else, and we learn from here a deep message about this concept, about Kedusha, about meeting HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and about how to achieve that.
Very good, exactly. And we dove deep into the Hebrew language, which again, we try to do in our videos, understanding this concept of la'aroch, of erech, of on the one hand, a value, but on the other hand, to organize what is the connection between the two. We talked about the values that we have in life, the values that are worth pursuing, the values that are worth internalizing to ourselves. How do you bring holiness into yourself, like you said? How do you make your life more holy? Hope you enjoy it. Take a look. So this week, Parashat Emor. Last year, we talked about the end of the Parasha, the story over there of the person Sheberach et Hashem. We'll link that video at the end of this one. This year, what I want to talk about is what happens just before that, what the Torah teaches us just before that, because we find some very interesting psukim. First of all, famously, we talk about the Moadim in this week's Parasha. We talk about the Chagim that we have. We also talk about the Chagim in two other places in the Torah, also specifically in Parashat Pinchas, where we talk about the Korbanot of those Chagim. Over here in Parashat Emor, we do not mention which actual sacrifices were brought on those Moadim, on those holidays, on those Chagim. And really the first question is, so why are we talking about the Moadim over here? If you want to say that we're talking about Korbanot, we're talking about the work that the Kohen does, we're talking about the sacrifices that were brought, we're talking about what kind of animal, what kind of behemah you're allowed to bring, and then we talk about the Korbanot of the Moadim. Fine, I understand the connection and the relevancy. However, we don't talk about the Korbanot of those Chagim, we're just talking about them in general. So first of all, why are we talking about them in Parashat Emor? But then, more than that, right after it, we're talking about, apparently, the shemen of the menorah, the olive oil that was brought for the menorah, and then about the bread that was made for the table, for the Shulchan. So why are we talking about these things over here? Why are we talking about these in this week's parasha? What's the connection between all the things, between the moadot, between the chagim, and then the shemen and the lechem in the menorah and the Shulchan?
Yeah, that's a great question. I always expect to see here, the korbanot of the moadim, all of the most important descriptions of the chagim. This is what we read on the Chagim when we read the Torah, because this is the main place where we talk about the Chagim. So what is this really about? And I think to understand this, we have to leave that understanding or that assumption that Vayikra is about Korbanot. Yes, there are Korbanot in Vayikra, but there's a lot of other things in Vayikra as well. What I think is the link in Vayikra is the concept of Kedusha, is the concept of achieving Kedusha. And we just ended Parashat Kedoshim to you, and we discussed 2 years ago this fact that Parashat Kedoshim just gives a list of many types of mitzvot, all different mitzvot, not necessarily related, not necessarily seeming very holy mitzvot. A lot of them are ben adam lechavaro, social mitzvot, but we explained that the essence of Kedusha is the concept of connecting heaven and earth, is elevating things. It's not about separating from the world, the opposite. Kedusha is always about when you bring something physical. We make kiddush on wine. When you take something physical and give it a deeper purpose and give it more meaning. Like in Hebrew we say a hakdasha, when I dedicate something. So Parashat Kedoshim is about dedicating my action. Every single thing I do, every aspect of my life, there's a mitzvah I can do. There's some meaning I can give to it. I can do it like everyone else, or I can make it more special. And by that, I sanctify that action, and I sanctify myself through every single aspect of my life, being able to find that Kedusha, find that meaning, dedicated to something more than just its simple, basic purpose. And I think that what we're seeing here is a continuation of that. Yes, we had in between also about the Kohanim, because their rules of achieving Kedusha are different than our rules of achieving Kedusha. But now we're back to us. Daber el bnei Yisrael, ele moadei Hashem asher tikru'u otam b'moadam, mikra'ei kodesh. This is about sanctifying what? Time. So we sanctified our action, our possession, all of that before. Now it's about time. How do we elevate time? How do we sanctify time? How do we make our time special? But I think when talking about Kedusha, we have to realize that if Kedusha is connecting heavens and the earth, then there are two sides here. The Kedusha can never happen on one side. We have to do our part, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu has to do his part. We can build a house for HaKadosh Baruch Hu and call it Beit HaMikdash, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu has to rest his presence in that Mikdash. It's a meeting. And that's exactly what we see here on the Chagim. Ele Mo'adei, and we've discussed this also in the past, that the word Mo'ed means vad, means a meeting. We're setting up a time to meet with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And it's interesting because the Sifri and Devarim, when talking about the different times we talk about the Mo'adim, so it mentions the Korbanot or in Pinchas, and it says, what is this Parsha about? Mipnei Sidran, because of their order, to set up the order of the Chagim. So in essence, what the Sifri is saying is, now you're setting up your calendar. Later we'll talk about the Korbanot you do, later we'll talk about a few other things, but this is where you set up the calendar. And if we look at the content of what we have here, it's all about those special days, the Mikra'ei Kodesh, the days we don't do Melacha, the concept of elevating certain days. It's setting up that full calendar. This is what we're going to meet. And we're also going to meet here and we're going to meet over there. And if this is what that's about, maybe this also explains the next part about the Ner Tamid and the Lechem HaPanim. These are both things that are always, that are constant, that are every day. But if we look at the word that repeats itself all the time, it's the concept of Ya'aroch, La'aroch, Ma'arechet. Ma'arechet, La'aroch is to set up, is to organize. You know, it doesn't say anywhere in the Torah that there's a mitzvah to light the Nerot in the Mikdash. The mitzvah, it says here, is Ya'aroch oto Aaron. Aaron will set it up. The light, maybe the light comes from above at the end. It's a connection. For that light, we need the connection between heavens and earth. But what is our role? That's what the Parsha here is teaching us. And I think this is very, very important. When we realize that Kedusha isn't something we just do on our own. If it was, then we wouldn't be meeting anybody. We would be meeting ourselves. We would decide our own Chagim, decide our own minhagim, do what we want, and we'll end up staying here within our world. If it's about meeting HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we have to open our ears, listen, and ask, so when do you want to meet? And where? And how? And how should I prepare? All of the work of Kedusha is not about the meeting itself. It's about my part in that meeting, which is preparing myself, which is setting myself up, the right time, the right place, in the right way. La'arochoto, I set up the nerot, I prepare them, I clean them, I make it all perfect, ready for that meeting when the light will shine in the menorah. Every one of the Chagim is these moments where I wait and prepare myself and do what I need to do. If it's cleaning up for Pesach, if it's building a sukkah, and I wait for that moment. You said we're going to meet in a certain place, in a certain table. I'm supposed to wait there and set things up and stand there and do it a certain time. I do all those things so that I'm prepared for this meeting, for this Kedusha, which is the meeting between heavens and earth. This is true on the Chagim, but this is true also every single day in the things that are Tamid, like the Menorah and like the Lechem HaPanim.
Exactly. I think just like you're saying, the whole point of Sefer Vayikra is really to talk about the Kedusha, about how do we sanctify our lives, how do we make our lives more worthy, with more Kedusha in them, how do we bring Kedusha into this world, like we've discussed many times in the past. We've discussed this in Parashat Doshim, we've discussed this also last week in Parshat Emor when we talked about the Kohen Gadol who goes into Kodesh HaKodashim, into the most holiest place, the Holy of Holies. And the reason Achrimot begins with the work that the Kohen has to do, we said, is to tell us individually that when we want to go into the Holy of Holiness, that when we want to bring holiness into our lives, we have to work hard for it. It requires a lot of hard work and it doesn't come easily. And maybe this Parsha, these Moadim, and then the Shemen Zayit and the Lechem tell us the other aspect of how do you bring holiness into your life. And just like you're saying, first of all, the Moadim, when we have these time throughout the year, the days that are holy, in order to help us elevate ourselves through those days, they happen in different times throughout the year and help us prepare ourselves for those days. But also, besides those days, we have the things that happen tamid, that are constant, both constant at night, dafka at night, me'erev ad boker, dafka at night, when everybody's seemingly sleeping and doing nothing, dafka then something is constantly happening and being worked on. But also the entire time, throughout the entire work, for one single moment, there isn't a time when there's no bread on the table. That bread is tamid, like we've discussed in the past. When they put the new bread in, the previous bread was pushed out, because you have to have every single moment of time, you have to have bread on that table. That's what that tamid means. This tamid tells us that it has to be constant, it has to happen all the time. But more than that, it doesn't happen outside in public. It's not the korban tamid, the sacrifice that was brought by the public, in public, outside on the mizbeach, every single day, twice a day. This is something that's happening inside. It's happening by the Kohen. It's brought by all of Am Yisrael. Veikhu elecha, all of Am Yisrael have to bring to you, but it's done by Aaron. And like you're saying, this concept of la'aroch is a very interesting word in Hebrew, because it means also organizing, ma'arechet. It means to put things in order, but it also also means value, erech. Something that has a value to itself is something with an erech. But not only erech as value, but also as a virtue. It's an arachim. It's our values that we live by. This is what erech is. This shoresh means both order, organization, and setting things up, but also it means values and giving something its own value. And maybe this is another message that the Torah is telling us here. When you talk about our values that we live by, the most important things for us, the holy things for us, how do we make them apply to ourselves? That's by a constant work on it. You have to work on it constantly. When you have a value that you want to achieve, you don't just get it easily. Again, when you want to go into the holy of holiness, you have to work hard on it. So the same thing, when you have values that you want to live by, values that you believe in, and you want to make it part of your personality, you want to make it part of you, you have to work on it. You have to set up a ma'arechet, an organization. You have to organize the things and then work on it constantly. And you have to work on it in private where nobody else looks. It's not about standing out there and yelling, oh, I have this great value, look at me. That's not how it works. It's about working behind the scene on this virtue, on this value, and working hard on it and working on it constantly, even when you don't feel like working on it, even at night when you want to sleep, even in other times. That's when you have to work on it. That's when you take that value and you make it part of yours. That's when you take that holiness and you bring it into your life. But it's also a two-way street. In order to work on something constantly, you have to believe in its value. You have to believe in the value that it gives to you. You have to believe in that value, that it will elevate your life, that it will elevate you. Maybe this is what the Torah is telling us over here with the shemen and the lechem, as we've discussed in the past. Both these things, the oil and the bread, this is what they represent. The oil that represents the wisdom, that represents the more metaphysical aspect of this world, and the bread that represents the more physical things, the more materialistic part of this world, the more materialistic objects of the world. The lechem and the shemen, the Shulchan versus the Menorah, these two things, what they represent in this world, the wisdom versus the materialism in this world, the two aspects that we have in our life, the people who are driven more by the wisdom, by mental achievements, and the people who are driven more by earthly, materialistic achievements in life. Both of them exist in the Mikdash. Both of them were there inside. Both of them have values in them, good values that we can bring into this world, that we can add to ourselves, and by that add holiness to ourselves. But that requires a lot of hard work. It requires a constant work, and it requires the work to be done behind the scenes when nobody's looking, dafka when nobody's looking. And through that work and through that dedication, that's how you get to the holiness. That's how you make these values part of you. You make these arachim, these values, part of you through the ma'arechet, through the la'aroch, through the working on it, through the organizing it, and constant dedication. And this is how we become more holy. Maybe this is what the Torah is trying to tell us over here in connecting these different parshiyot.
It's interesting the connection you're making here between erech, value, and la'aroch in terms of organizing. Because, we can think, why do I need moadim? I'll meet HaKadosh Baruch Hu when I want, when I feel it. That's when I'll meet HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But the Torah says differently. Things that have value, things that you set a time for. You set a time, you set a place. Things that are important to you, think about it in this world, it's always going to have a special place and a special time for it. When I dedicate time, when there's order in my life, it means that it matters. When things just happen and there's chaos and I do what I want, when I want, then nothing really gets its own value. When I'm able to set things up, okay, there's a time for this, and there's a time for that, and there's a time for that, then every single one of those times becomes valuable, has its own place, has its own respect. This connection is really a deep connection between when I am able to prepare and organize, is also when I'm able to see value in something. If I value this relationship, if I value this connection between Shamayim and Aretz, this Kedusha, then the way I achieve it is by Seder, is by La'aroch, is by Mo'adim, is having the set meetings, those set times, and having those other things which are Tamid, which are every single day. But the work I'm doing there too is organizing, is setting it up, is preparing myself for this special meeting with HaKadosh Baruch.
Beautiful, beautiful, very good. We can continue talking also about Pesach Sheni and Lag BaOmer, but we've discussed those also in the past couple of years, so we'll just remind the viewers what we did talk about in the past couple of years. First of all, we talked about Shavuos, which is in this week's Parsha. When you look at the Psukim, there's a very interesting fact about Shavuot that is going to blow you away. If you think Shavuos is a one-day Chag or a two-day Chag in Chutz La'aretz, you are wrong. So you might want to take a look in the Psukim and watch the video from 2 years ago. Also, like I mentioned in the beginning, we talked about the end of the Parsha where it talks about the person that went out and used Hashem's name and then either cursed someone else or even cursed HaKadosh Baruch Hu. What is going on over there? What is that story about? Why is Shlomit Bat Divri mentioned over there? We'll link those two videos. And of course, if you enjoyed this video, feel free to like it on YouTube, comment below. And of course, if you haven't yet subscribed to our channel, please consider subscribing. And yet see next week in Mitzvah Hashem, it's going to be Parshat Emor. We're going to be celebrating our third finish of the Torah cycle as we started this 3 years ago on Parashat Bamidbar. So looking forward for next next week.
Exciting milestone. Shkoyach, Shabbat Shalom.
Shkoyach to you, Shabbat Shalom, and Emet Hashem. We'll see you again next week.